Hi guys, this is Bud, and today I'll be going over the GO Reflex Training. First of all, we can go to the settings. I just want to emphasize the importance of the mouse sensitivity conversion. It's important that the 360-degree distance that it takes you to do a full rotation in Battlefield and in Counter-Strike needs to be exactly the same. When this conversion has been done, then this ensures that your mouse sensitivity is exactly the same between the two games. Now, the obvious reasons for why this is important is we will be building up our muscle memory inside Counter-Strike, and if the sensitivity is the same, then it is directly translatable to Battlefield 4. Next up, we'll be looking at the audio settings. I prefer to use to lower down the master volume to 0 just to ensure that the shooting and the in-game sound does not interfere with the metronome. Okay, now for guns, you can really use anything you like, but I personally prefer using the M4A1S. I feel that the first shot accuracy is on point, and when you're busy doing that in training, you don't want the bullet to miss at all, so this works nicely for me. Next up, looking at the settings here. For the training mode, where we will be doing the angles and slides training mode, you could start off with 8R as a starting point. I would say this is the absolute minimum requirement, given that the nature of the training, going smaller would be beneficial, but obviously the smaller you go, the harder it becomes. So we can start off with for demonstrative purposes, I would start off with 5R to make my point. I prefer to use green since it contrasts nicely with my crosshair. You can choose whatever color works for you. The axis traces we will be using, including the rest, with a test duration of 2 minutes. The tar types will be also including the rest, and the distances we want to include levels 3 and 4. Levels 3 and 4 basically includes the outer 3rd and 4th ring in the spiderweb. Now, another important thing to note is that once you've been moving around inside a given level, it's important to reset yourself so that you're always on the same position when starting your training. We want to eliminate as many variables as possible, and we want to keep the training as consistent as possible. Easiest way to do this is just to shoot on any other level and then go to the desired level. Then just leave your keyboard alone so that you're in exactly the same spot each time. Next up, I'll be talking about what we're trying to achieve with the GO Reflex Training. Previously, when Rudy introduced this training, he told us that the point of the training was to build muscle memory. And I just would like to elaborate on that a little bit more, so that everyone understands exactly what this entails, what this means. Building muscle memory means that you're developing the capability of moving to a point without having to confirm with your eyes that you have indeed landed on said point. So, for example, if I had to move to the 4th dot on the left, if I had no muscle memory, I had to use my eyes to confirm that I'm ending on the 4th point. With a developed muscle memory, I am capable of moving to this point and stopping on it without having to see or without having to confirm with my eyes that I have indeed landed on that point. Now, why do we want this? Why do we want to build this muscle memory? So first of all, having to confirm where your crosshair is all the time with your eyes is not only a strenuous activity on your eyes, it's also a time-consuming activity. If you're capable of moving and snapping onto a point without having to confirm with your eyes exactly where this point has landed, and without having to compensate or correct for your action, then you save a lot of time. Now, in the FPS world, a lot of time can be a couple of milliseconds. Every millisecond in your 1v1 engagements count. So let's take Jimmy, for example. He has never done this before, and he is now trying to shoot people in game. When pointing at people, he tends to aim next to people's heads. He tries to compensate for his mistake. He pulls too far to the right, too far to the left. It's a mess. Jimmy cannot hit his target on the face. Now, Bob here has done his reflex training for a couple of months now, and he's a ninja master. Now, all Bob has to do is snap to target and shoot him in the face. No problem. There's no mistake, there's no compensation or correction, there's no time wasted. Essentially, reducing the time to kill dramatically. In the next section, I'll be explaining how one can become better at target acquisition and how one can focus your efforts on building up that muscle memory. Because simply pulling from point A to B, if you do that enough times, that'll eventually build up the muscle memory required to be able to do this action without having to look. But in addition to this action, I would also like to just explain what's happening in a little bit more detail, especially when one starts to shoot these targets at a higher beats per minute or at a higher tempo. So what I've noticed is that when acquiring your target, there is 2 hand movements involved. Your initial hand movement is what I call your hands idea, or what I call the hands effort to acquire the target. So if I know I need to get to the 4th dot to the left, my brain knows how far it is, and my hand thinks he knows how far it is, so we move it that far. Now, that was just the initial movement. That is one part of the process. And the second part of this process is the confirmation step, or the refinement step of the target acquisition. This is when my eyes see where I've landed, and my eyes see that I have pulled slightly too far to the left. And the second part of the movement is the necessary adjustment to correct for this error. So when building the perfect muscle memory to perform that action, to perform that movement, this means that you want to get the first hand movement as accurate as possible in as many cases as possible. And when this is done, you effectively reduce the need for the second step. And if you can possibly eliminate the need for the second step entirely, then I would say that your muscle memory is then spot on, or I would say that you have mastered your muscle memory. So why are we trying to eliminate the second step? The second step ties into what I've mentioned before. The second step means you need to look with your eyes how far off I am, or first of all, am I on target, yes or no? And I see, no, I'm not. Then that means I need to then calculate in my mind how far off am I. So then I see, okay, I'm not too far off, and then I need to calculate in my mind what sort of correction would this require for me to be on target. Now, preferably, we want to correct for my mistake in one movement only. We don't want to extend this further. So after applying the correction, we preferably want to be on target and not having to recorrect after each previous correction, because that means we're just messing around and we're never going to hit the target. Now, I'm obviously talking about stationary targets and not moving targets. When one looks at moving targets, you're doing this process continuously. The entire where is my target? Where is my crosshair? How much do I need to move my crosshair to meet the target? That sort of thing. That needs to happen continuously until the target is dead. So the point is we want to get the first hand movement on point, such that when the movement has occurred or when the initial hand movement is done, that you're on target. Now, this allows us to be able to acquire targets with our eyes closed even. It's not necessary to look where I'm ending, because I know that every single time when I make a movement, I am perfectly on point. Also, I would like to mention that the error and correction in the second step becomes more evident or more clear when shooting at a higher tempo. When shooting at slower rates, when shooting at 60 beats per minute, for example, it's a lot easier to make the movement fluid movement and rely purely on your eyes to confirm whether you're on target or not. Now, what I've noticed with myself is when moving on to the higher tempos without knowing or without having your hand learnt this distance by itself. Basically, what I'm saying is, if you try, in a way, if you want to try and confer that your hand has learned the distance, you can try and do a faster movement. And then it becomes very obvious if your hand knows the distance or not. Doing a slow movement is easy. You can quickly see with your eyes when to stop. Doing a fast movement, you're relying on that first hand movement more than the second one. So with a slower one, you're sort of combining both into one, and it makes it a lot easier to end on a target. So even at the slower rates, I would advise you to incorporate every now and then, or maybe on each movement, trying to incorporate slightly faster movements to see how far off your hand thinks that distance is. After you warmed up, unlike I am now, you should be able to, even for the further targets, you should be able to snap to the target every single time without problems. Now, when your training has been done correctly and after you've warmed up properly, you should be able to snap to a given point with the first hand movement, which minimizes the necessity for the second hand movement to correct for the error. Here is an example of untrained muscle memory. In this recording, you will see that the initial hand movement or the first hand movement has not been trained. It is inaccurate, and I had to rely heavily on the second hand movement in order to correct for the errors made. Finally, in the last example, you will see me shoot with a slightly trained muscle memory. I would not say it's perfect. It's far from perfect, but in comparison with the previous example, you will see that the first hand movement is a lot more accurate in acquiring the target, and the second hand movement isn't as necessary. In some cases, the first hand movement is spot on, and just shooting after the first hand movement is all that's necessary to shoot the target.